Welcome to Unit 2, Political Participation. In the first unit of Foundational Ideas, we looked at what are the core beliefs of the American system. Where do we believe power comes from? What limits should there be to that power? And how do we create a system that balances out the needs for people's freedom, but also the need for social order and safety? In this second unit, we're going to be looking at how people actually participate in the political system. We're going to be looking at the disagreements Americans have about how that power should be used. We're going to spend some time taking a deeper look at the actual process of voting, and then we'll analyze the role the media plays in all this, both traditional news media, but also taking a look at the role of social media. The first key question we're going to tackle here is, what is a political ideology, and which ones are the dominant ones in the United States? That is, what are the political ideologies followed by most Americans? It's important to note that political ideologies are not the same as political parties, but we'll get to that in a little bit. In America and in a lot of politics around the world, they like to divide political ideologies up into the left and the right. Political ideologies that are classified as, quote, the left, generally push for big social changes in society. They're not happy with the way things are, and they want to make changes to do what they say would make society better. On the other side, we call that right-wing politics. People in the right-wing ideologies tend to be more happy with the way things are and are more resistant to change. What's important to note is that if you look at this chart here, if you go too far to the left, we wind up in the extreme left wing, and that ends up in dictatorship or an autocratic government system that we studied last unit. If you go too far to the right, you get to the extreme right, and you also get to a dictatorship, a one-person autocratic government, and so going too far to the left or too far to the right can be very dangerous. In America, the fight really isn't about should we be all the way to the left or all the way to the right. The question is, how far left or how far right or how far close to the center should our politics really be? How much change do we want to see, and how much of current society do we want to keep? Where you fall on that spectrum determines what your political ideology is, which is just a fancy word that says it means a set of beliefs about how government power should be used. In America, there really are three dominant political ideologies: conservatism, liberalism, and libertarianism. People who believe in each of these ideologies all fundamentally agree on the core values and key principles of the Constitution. That's based on popular sovereignty, that government power is limited, that we should be separating the powers of government, there should be checks and balances, we should have a federal system. So they all agree on this. Where they disagree and argue is over the question of what should the government do with the limited power that we have given it in the Constitution. Now, political ideologies should not be confused with political parties. Political parties are groups of people who share a political ideology and work to control the government based on their ideological beliefs. Today in America, there are two dominant political parties: the Democratic Party and the Republican Party. There are minor third parties, but they generally don't win any major elections, and so we're not going to be spending a lot of time talking about them in this class. Instead, we're going to be focusing on what do these political ideologies believe, what do liberals believe, what do conservatives believe, what do libertarians believe, and then looking at how that reflects the Democratic and Republican parties as we see them today. Another area people get confused is by confusing political ideology, political party, and economic ideology. So remember, political ideology is the beliefs you have about how government power should be used. A political party are people who use their ideas and try to control the government, generally through elections. An economic ideology is your beliefs about how the limited resources we have on Earth should be divided up and used within a country. Capitalism is an economic ideology that says when it comes to how should we use our resources, those decisions will be made by individuals, not the government. Individuals will make decisions about how to use resources based on what they think will make them the most profit, the most money. For instance, Nike and Adidas both are shoe companies that produce shoes that they sell to us in order to make a profit for themselves. No government told those companies you are going to make shoes. They decided to do it because they could make money doing it. Under capitalism, Adidas and Nike will compete with each other to provide the best product at the lowest price, because the better the product at a lower price point will get more consumers, they'll make more money for the company. If a third company, Reebok, enters the shoe market, offering a better shoe at an even lower price, then Adidas and Nike are going to have to, in order to stay competitive, figure out how to get their prices lower, or they're going to have to produce a better product, or they're going to have to leave the market and shut down. Again, under this way, capitalists believe the people competing for profit will lead to the best outcome for the most number of people. Communism often gets confused with a political ideology. In reality, it's an economic ideology. It's a set of economic beliefs that believes that the decisions about how resources should be used should be made by the government and not individuals. That is, we collectively together decide how to use limited resources in a way that benefits the most people possible. So resources aren't used to make profits for individuals. Instead, resources are used collectively to get to the best outcome for the most number of people. Communism gets confused with political systems a lot, but communism is really an economic ideology that believes decisions should be made collectively by all people through the government and not individuals. In this scenario, the people, through their government, decide that they need shoes. They figure out who's the best at making shoes, and they tell that person, you have to produce shoes for the rest of us. In exchange, people who are good at growing food will grow food and give food to the people making the shoes. So everyone does what they're best at to create the best outcome for the best people, but there's a lot less individual choice in a communist system. Communism at its core is really about people collectively coming together to decide what is the best use of resources for the most number of people, instead of leaving it up to individuals to make their decisions based on what will profit the individual. People usually confuse socialism and communism. Communism, again, is when the government, we collectively, through the government, make all decisions about what businesses will be started, how we use our resources, who gets those resources. Whereas socialism says sometimes we'll collectively, through the government, decide how to use a resource, and sometimes individuals will decide that. And then socialism, again, gets confused both with communism and in a political system, but it is an economic system. Socialism is kind of a halfway point between communism and capitalism. So under socialism, sometimes the government decides what resources will be used, sometimes individuals decide. It's important to note that pretty much every government out there has an economy that is at some degree socialist. That is, sometimes they let the government make decisions, sometimes they let individuals make decisions. Even the United States has socialist elements to its economy. For instance, we individually let people start businesses in order to make profit. Nike, for instance, the government did not tell Nike to make shoes. They decided to make them because they felt they could make a profit making shoes. However, other things like public education, we collectively decide to use resources by taxing everyone to produce a public school system that everyone can use. So in that way, it is we collectively, through the government, making resource decisions that makes us, in some extent, socialist. However, if you look at the chart at the bottom of the screen here, you can see that no system is purely communist or purely capitalist. The United States is pretty far into the right, the pure capitalist side of the spectrum, but again, we do have some socialist elements. North Korea has almost complete government control over everything that's made, bought, and sold inside their country, and so they're as far communist as we have out there in the world today. France and Sweden and Europe are kind of in the middle right there. So Western European countries generally have a socialist economy where the government makes a lot more decisions about resources than the government here in the United States does, but this is really up to the people in the country to decide themselves which economic system they feel is best. Okay, we've identified the three main political ideologies in America: conservative, liberal, and libertarian. We've named the two main political parties, Democrats and Republicans. And we've briefly gone over the three main economic systems out there: capitalist, communist, and socialist. Let's take a look at how all these things come together. So we'll start with a key question. In general, what do conservatives believe? A disclaimer here, not all conservatives were going to agree with every single thing on this generalization. But I'm going to give you a stereotypical picture of what a stereotypical conservative would believe, the same with a stereotypical liberal and a stereotypical libertarian, to show you the differences between those ideologies. Economically, conservatives are very strong capitalists in general. They believe that taxes on individuals should be low and that you're the best person to decide how to use your money. Taxes at their core in our system is the government saying, we don't trust you to use all of your money responsibly to provide resources or services that are essential for the community, so we're going to take some of your money and decide how to use it for you. Pure capitalists would argue that if people want their kids to have an education, well, we don't need the government taxing individuals in order to pay for that education. Instead, people will keep their tax money, and if they want their kids to be educated, they'll use that money they're not giving to the government in order to pay for private tutors for their own kids. This is capitalism to take into its extreme. Now, again, most conservatives wouldn't say we should get rid of all public education. There are some that do, but most wouldn't. Conservatives also distrust the use of government power to make laws about resources. In general, they are very big believers in the capitalist free market. The idea that if you let different individuals compete with each other, that competition will ultimately lead to the best product at the lowest price for the most number of people. So we don't need the government stepping in and telling people what to do. Conversely, they do more often trust businesses to do the right thing, believing that if the government steps in and create rules they have to follow, the government is only going to mess businesses up. For instance, why have a law that says employees must wash their hands before returning to work and when they're working at a fast food restaurant? Pure capitalists and conservatives would argue that law is unnecessary. Businesses will force their employees to wash their hands because if they don't, then people will get sick and will stop eating at that restaurant, and the owners of the restaurant will lose profit. Therefore, we don't need the government creating the law because businesses will automatically do what's best in order to ensure they get the best profit. Conservatives would also argue that if society needs something, the government shouldn't be the one providing that services through taxes. Instead, individuals will decide to set up a business to sell that service that people will pay for. If enough people want it, then the person with the business will stay in business because they'll make enough money to stay in business. If not enough people want that service, they won't pay for it, and the company will shut down. There's no need for the government to step in. Now, even the most hardcore capitalists, for the most part, will argue that the government should be providing some services, like the police and the military. That's because conservatives in general believe in protecting the status quo, protecting things the way they are right now. The police and the military are a big part of this. This belief in protecting the status quo, protecting the way things are right now, is why they believe in strong punishments for criminals. They believe that punishing criminals will stop other people from committing that crime in the future. The idea here is that if you knew ahead of time that the punishment for stealing a car was going to be 2 years in prison when you're caught, then you're going to think twice before you steal that car. In other words, strong punishments for criminal actions will deter people or create the incentive for people to not do that criminal action and thus protect the status quo, protect social order. As proponents of keeping things the way they are much less comfortable with change. In general, many conservatives believe Christianity should be the basis of all the laws of the United States, and there's a strong desire to go back to the political life of the 1950s, where you have the male figure who is the head of the household, and everyone, the wife and the children, are kind of subservient to the father figure who goes out and earns money to support the family, and the mom stays home and raises the kids. Again, not all conservatives believe these things, but it is a generalized belief that you find among the conservative ideology, this longing for the way things used to be in the past. Conservatives in general are more likely to be members of the Republican Party. In the past, you'd have conservative Democrats and liberal Republicans, but that's not so much the way it is anymore. So today, if you're a conservative, you're probably more likely to be a Republican. Now, other phrases we use to describe them are the political right or the right wing. The reason why we use the term right and left, this dates back to the French Revolution. We're not going to get that in this class. You might want to look back at your notes from your world history class. Okay, now we have a stereotypical picture of what a general stereotyped conservative would believe. In general, they're strong capitalists believing the government should not be making decisions about resources. Instead, individuals should be allowed to kind of do their own thing in order to make as much money for themselves as possible, and the government should just stay out of people's way. They believe taxes should be low because you're the best one to decide how to use your money, not the government. At its core, they have a very strong distrust of government power in general. They think that when the government acts, especially in the economy, the government's probably just going to mess things up. However, they do believe in strong government power when it comes to creating social order and protecting the status quo. This is why, in general, conservatives will support more funding for the police and for the military. They believe in strong punishments for criminals in order to stop people in the future from committing that same crime. They want a stronger role for Christianity in our government, and they have a strong desire to go back to the lifestyle of the 1950s. Now let's introduce you to a stereotypical liberal, someone who follows the liberal ideology. And again, not all liberals are going to agree with every single thing on this list, but it's kind of just a generalization to give you a better idea. Economically, liberals have a wide range of views. So there are some who are capitalist. In America, that's pretty common. Most liberals are capitalist. There's also socialists. This is less common, but there are quite a few socialist liberals in America. And there are also communists. Now, there are a lot of communist liberals in America, but they are the rarest of the three types of liberals. So there are capitalist liberals, socialist liberals, and communist liberals. Far too often in today's culture, all liberals are called communists, when really most are capitalists with some socialists and a sprinkling of communists if you look at the whole picture. In general, liberals believe the richer you are, the more you should pay in taxes, and that money should be used for the things that benefit everyone. The idea here is that if you got rich in America, it's because you benefited from the resources we collectively paid for: the roads, the postal system, the public education system for your workforce. And since you make more money because of that, you can afford to chip in more. The idea here being a billionaire who makes $1 million a year can afford to chip in more and should pay more in taxes than someone who's struggling to pay rent each month. These taxes would go for things such as roads, schools, firefighters, libraries, things that benefit everyone and will allow more people the opportunity to join that wealthier upper class. Liberals are supporters of what we call a progressive tax rate system. With a progressive income tax, the more you make, the higher percent of taxes you pay on your income. So, under the current tax code, at least as of recording of this video in January of 2025, the first $9,950 everyone earns is taxed at 10%. That means 10 cents out of every dollar you earn up to $9,950 will go to the government. When you earn $1 over that, your first $9,950 are still being taxed at 10%, but that $9,950 first dollar will be taxed at 12%, that is 12 cents out of the dollar. And they'll continue to do that for every one of those dollars up to $40,525. Those first $9,950 are still being taxed at 10%. If you earn $40,526, well, that one extra dollar will be taxed at 22%, whereas every dollar below it will still be taxed at those lower rates. If we go to the bottom of the scale, you'll see a 37% tax rate, but no one is paying 37% on every dollar they earn. Instead, that 37% only applies to every dollar you earn over $523,600. The money you earn below that amount is taxed at those lower rates. The idea here, again, is the more you earn, the more you benefited from the system, the more you can afford to chip in to help out those who are barely making an ends meet. You're still allowed to keep the vast majority of your wealth, you're just asked to chip in a little bit more because you can afford to. In our system, one of the benefits of getting married is you can file jointly, which means that you can actually earn and keep more of your income at a lower tax rate. For instance, that 10%, that lowest tax bracket, if you're a single person, you start paying 12% at $9,951. But if you're married, you don't pay that 12% until you collectively have earned $19,901. So you notice there is a financial benefit to being married. This is because the government wants to create an incentive for people to be married. They think it's good to have people married, so they use the tax code to incentivize that. In general, liberals also believe the government should play a role in how resources are used. A great example of this is the Clean Air Act. And if you look at the image here on the right, you see two images of the New York City skyline. Before the Clean Air Act, you can barely see the buildings in the picture. The one on the right, see that yellowish, brownish look, that's all the pollution in the atmosphere. After years of the Clean Air Act being implemented, it's now clearer skies. You can see the buildings better. So this is the government using laws to tell businesses, you can't use your resources to make things in a way that creates too much pollution. It's bad for everyone. So this is the liberals using the government in order to manage resources in order to create a better benefit for everyone. The conservative idea would be you don't need the government telling companies to pollute less. If people want cleaner air, they'll choose to buy from companies that make their products using less pollution, and the government shouldn't be stepping in. Liberals said, well, that clearly wasn't happening. People need clean air, and so they stepped in and created this law. Liberals are a lot less trusting of businesses. They believe that businesses need rules in order to stop them from hurting people. They should require employees to wash their hands before going to work. There should be a law about that so that no one gets sick. Liberals believe that minimum wages should be higher to ensure that companies aren't taking advantage of low-income workers. And liberals would argue there should be warning labels on products like vaping devices to make sure people know when they buy them that the nicotine that they're using in there is an addictive chemical that can be harmful to you. Liberals also push for laws regulating who these products can be sold to in order to keep minors and vulnerable people safe. Liberals also disagree with conservatives when it comes to crime and punishment. Whereas conservatives argue that strong punishments will create the incentive for people not to commit the crime, liberals want to create laws that target the reasons people become criminals in order to stop people from turning to a life in crime. So instead of just punishing someone for stealing a car, liberals would say, okay, why are people turning to car theft? Why are people stealing cars in the first place? Is it because they don't have enough education to get a better job to support themselves? Okay, let's pump money into the schools to provide better education. Is it because the jobs out there pay too low and so they can't afford rent, they can't afford to eat? Let's create minimum wages so the jobs that are out there, people can work and support themselves. So get at the underlying causes that lead to the crime instead of just focusing on the crime itself. Now, liberals don't say that we shouldn't punish criminals. Instead, they say, yes, prison is something that is necessary, but they believe prison should be about rehabilitating people who have committed the crime. What this means, instead of just making prison so terrible people decide never to go back, they use prison to rehabilitate people. So instead of just punishing, when you're in prison, we train you, give you the skills you need to survive so that when you get out, you don't have to turn back to crime in order to survive. So rehabilitation instead of punishment for criminals. And then in general, liberals are just more comfortable with society changing. They want more of a separation between religion and government. They believe that it's okay for people to act differently than they have in the past. Liberals look at the 1950s or other periods of U.S. history and say, things really weren't that great for everyone, so instead of looking back to go back to the past, let's find a way to make a better society for everyone. Currently, liberals are more likely to be members of the Democratic Party, although a lot of people who would call themselves very liberal say the Democratic Party is actually too conservative for them. But we'll talk about that later. So, Democrats are generally more liberal, Republicans are more generally conservative. Liberals are also known as the political left or the left wing, with the Democratic Party using the symbol of the donkey and the Republicans using the symbol of the elephant. Why? Well, that just dates back to a cartoon someone drew in the 1800s, and it kind of just stuck. Alright, so now we have this general view of liberals. Liberals in general have a mix of economic ideas. Many of them are capitalist, but they also have some socialists and communists amongst them. They want higher taxes on people who make more money because they feel those people benefited from society and should pay more into taxes for those resources that will benefit others. They call this a progressive tax system. They believe in using the power of government to help manage our resources, at least to some extent. They are more likely to believe that government can solve our problems and should be used to solve our problems, and are more distrustful of businesses. When it comes to crime and punishment, liberals in general believe that we should be focusing at the causes of the crime, and then when someone is in prison, focus on, instead of punishing, rehabilitating, so that when they get out, they can support themselves. They want more separation between government and religion, and are more okay with change. So let's turn to our third ideology, libertarianism. Economically, libertarians are the strongest capitalists. They believe that government should not provide any service beyond protecting private property. In general, libertarians believe businesses should be allowed to do whatever they want as long as people are willing to buy it. If a company wants to make a soda that kills people, if people keep buying it, libertarians would say, well, that's the fault of the people who keep buying it. They should have known better. That's not the government's job to play nanny. The one area libertarians believe the government should be using its power is to protect private property rights and provide for national defense. And that's it. This is basically summed up as the government should do nothing and just leave us alone as long as no one else is coming in and taking our stuff. Libertarians have a mixed party affiliation. Some are Democrats, some are Republicans. Some have their own libertarian party. They're kind of all over the place when it comes to political parties. All right, now let's look at some real-world examples. Where do political ideologies stand on important issues facing America today? This can start to help you understand maybe where you fall on this political ideology spectrum. Let's start with everyone's favorite topic, drugs. Conservatives believe in strong punishments for both drug users and drug sellers. The idea that if the punishment is strong enough, people will choose not to buy drugs or sell those drugs. Liberals support legalization of drugs like marijuana and are in favor of rehabilitation for addicts instead of harsh punishments. Again, the idea here for liberals would be that if someone's taking drugs, well, you shouldn't throw them in prison as a punishment. Instead, you get them the help they need to get off their addiction so they can be productive members of society again. Libertarians would believe that all drugs should be legalized. After all, it's no one's business what you decide to put into your body. If you want to put an addictive substance into your body, that's up to you. The government shouldn't be poking around in there. Next, let's look at the LGBTQ plus community. Remember, conservatives are less comfortable with change. They really look back to the 1950s as the idealized best period of American history. They also base a lot of their ideas on religion, specifically Christianity. So conservatives are more likely to believe that the LGBTQ community is unnatural or sinful or a corrupting influence on children. They believe homosexuality, bisexuality, being non-binary, they see that as a choice in society, something you're choosing to do, not something you're born as. And they don't look at transgenderism as a real thing. As a result, they do not believe the government should be providing special protections for this community. Instead, they see those extra protections for the LGBTQ community as an assault on the freedom of religion rights of Christians in America. Liberals, on the other hand, are more comfortable with change, and they believe that the government should be using its laws and its power to protect the LGBTQ community. They believe that homosexuality, bisexuality, non-binaryism, they see this as something you're born as, and they also agree that transgenderism is a real thing that is also deserving of special legal protections. Libertarians, well, they're more likely to believe that the government should just leave everyone alone, let people do what they want as long as they're not hurting anyone else's property. As far as are you born gay, or is something you choose to be gay, is transgenderism real or not, libertarians in general will just say, who cares, it doesn't matter, let people do what they want, the government should stay out of that business. Alright, let's take a look at immigration. Conservatives are more likely to believe that immigration is bad for America and that the 12 plus million undocumented immigrants in America should be deported. This means the 10 million people in America who cross into our country without following the official rules that you're supposed to follow, they should be kicked out and sent back to their countries of origin, regardless of what age they were when they came here. They also believe the U.S. should make it harder for people to move to the United States. This is because they see immigration as the cause of problems in America, like low wages, high rent, high crime. Statistics don't really necessarily bear this out as immigration as the cause of these things, but conservatives tend to believe it is, and thus create laws to make it harder for people to come to the country. Liberals are more likely to believe that immigration is good for America, that it makes us stronger. They believe that we should create a pathway for undocumented people to become citizens, especially people who came here as children and didn't really have a choice because their parents brought them here. They also like looking at the cause of immigration. Why are people coming to the United States, especially those who are crossing the border illegally? Many of these people, the liberals say, are crossing the border into our country illegally because they're running away from crime or corruption or climate change issues in their own country. So America should be helping those poorer countries out so that there's less of a reason for people to want to leave their country to come to the United States. And because they believe immigration is important to America, they want to make improvements to the legal pathways to immigration so that people can find ways to get into the country legally so they don't have to do it illegally. And libertarians are that mixed bag. They believe that anyone who comes here peacefully, has no criminal record, generally should be allowed to come to the United States, and that crossing the border without permission should not necessarily be a crime. Again, there is some contention in the libertarian ideology on this, so this one's a little more in flux. Alright, now you have an idea where these ideologies stand on different issues. Let's take a look at what do Americans believe. Are most Americans liberal? Are most Americans conservative? Are we mostly somewhere in between? Let's find out. Stop and take a moment to take a look at this chart on the right-hand side of the screen and try to describe for yourself one trend that the graphic is showing. You might see that the older you are, the more conservative you tend to be, whereas younger generations tend to be more liberal. If this trend continues into the future, which political party do you think is going to benefit from this? The answer you should have gone to was the Democratic Party, because liberals tend to be more democratic. So if this younger 18 to 29 generation continues to be this liberal, it'll mean a lot more Democrats will be voting in elections, and there'll be a lot less Republicans. And if that does happen, that means that the Conservative Party will likely become more liberal because they'll want to get more of those votes. This is the trend people thought was going to happen starting in 2014. Turns out that's not exactly how things played out, though, as people tend to get more conservative as they get older. In class, you're going to get a chance to take a quick quiz to figure out where you fall in this political spectrum. In general, though, about 40% of Americans identify as conservative, 45% identify as liberal, and about 15% identify as somewhere in the middle. We'll be taking this quiz in class to figure out again where you stand. As always, I'd like to end the notes today with you going back and rewriting today's goal. So you can either go back to the beginning of the video, scroll to the top of your note sheet, whatever you do, but I want you to literally write out, not copy and paste, but type out the goal of today so you can remind yourself what it was you were supposed to have learned. Then stop and think about what you've written down. What is in your notes? What are 3 facts in your notes that you could use to help show that you've met that goal? Finally, you should always have at least one question that's still on your mind about what we learned about. If you're thinking about the topic, you've got a question, so please write it down so that I can respond to it for you and help you deepen your understanding of this topic. All right, there you have it. Have a great night.